Hi, I'm not real big on keeping physical books after I read them, but there are a few that I've kept over the years. And in this video, I'm going to show you a few of them. When I was younger, I moved around a lot. Then once I became an adult, I actually joined the Air Force, and I was in the Air Force for some years and moved around a bit then too. So carrying around physical books from one place to the next was kind of a pain. So I stopped keeping all the books that I read and started just keeping the ones that I really liked. So in this video, I'm just going to show you a few of those. This book right here, Vampires, typically when I'm on a plane, I can't read a novel. I have to stick with short stories. But with this book, I got on a plane and 4.5, 5 hours later, I was 2/3 of the way through the book as my plane was landing. This book really kept my attention going, and it's one of the books that I've kept all these years after. Ship of Fools by Richard Paul Russo. This book might be kind of hard to find. I think it's got a different name now, Leviathan or something like that. It's a pretty good science fiction horror novel. The main character is really interesting, and it's just all around an entertaining book. He's a pretty good writer, this guy. Now, Michael Swanwick's Stations of the Tide. This one's an interesting book. You can see right there on the cover that it won the Nebula Award. The very first line of it is "the bureaucrat fell out of the sky," and after that it's just kind of a weird ride through an alien landscape with some interesting characters that he has to deal with along the way to completing his mission. This is Empire 99 by Ron Goulart. It was based on a comic strip that him and Gil Kane used to do years ago. For whatever reason, it's very comic-y. I used to read a lot of comic books, so I've kept this book all these years. I actually have the second book, which is called The Cyborg King, but I haven't ever read that one yet. Then you've got these, the Scions of Shannara series by Terry Brooks. The Heritage of Shannara series by Terry Brooks. So I've kept these all these years. And the main reason I kept these was this book right here. For the first 2 books in the series, they kept building up to the fact that this island where all the elves were supposedly living was very, very deadly, and I completely expected a letdown once somebody actually went to this island. But once they got there in this book, it was pretty good. So I ended up keeping the entire series, and then the battle with the horseman guys here, this was a pretty good battle in the end of this book as well. Now, I'm not a huge Star Trek fiction reader, but I do love stories where real world events from our timeline have been used in a story, and they are folded into the story naturally and make complete sense. And if anybody remembers Space Seed, the episode from the original series, you'll remember Khan Noonien Singh for sure. And this book basically tells about how him and his race of supermen tried to take over the world. And the main character in these books is Gary Seven, who was a character from an episode called Assignment Earth, which was probably one of my favorite episodes of the original series. Now we get to the official sequel to The Time Machines, written by Stephen Baxter. This book's pretty good. It's a little slow at times, but I'm a bit of a sucker for a book with illustrations in it, and you know, it's got illustrations every so often, which are not terrible, but not super great. But still, you know, it's an entertaining book if you are into The Time Machine. Charles de Lint here, The Ivory and the Horn. This is a collection of short stories in his Newford setting. If you haven't read any of Charles de Lint's stuff in his Newford setting, then do yourself a favor and pick one of these up, because they're all pretty good. And then we get to a book that, again, a little bit slow at times, kind of episodic, but the ending of this really knocked it out of the park. And I have the sequel here too, which I've also kept. I don't remember too much about the sequel, but I remember it being halfway decent. And then we get to something from way back in my childhood, way back when I was a young teenager, and it's a series that was called The Dungeon and it was curated by Philip Jose Farmer. It was written by a bunch of different authors. Here's the second volume of it. You can see the color change there on the guy's cloak. And then, you know, another one here. This one has a dinosaur in it, which actually does come into play in the story. And you got this one here, volume 4, and that was volume 6. Volume 5, and then volume 6, which is the final volume. I remember when I was reading these books, I liked them so much, but there was a lot of stuff that I had never read about before. So I was such a nerd. I made like a little map for each book. I don't know how much of that you can see, but I've got one for each book. They're pretty old. These things are older than my kids for sure. Then we get to my favorite author, Tim Powers, and I've kept a physical copy of just about every book of his that I have read, and I have read a lot of his stuff. So not the last few years, but a lot of his earlier stuff up through the 90s. This one's one of my favorites. And this is probably another really top 3 of his, along with Declare and the Anubis Gates, which, funnily enough, I don't have a mass market paperback of the Anubis Gates, but I have one for On Stranger Tides here. And then I've got I forget what this trilogy is called, but it's Last Call, Expiration Date, and Earthquake Weather. Really interesting stuff here. Love Tim Powers. And then I have when I was in the 80s, when this guy hit it really big and became like the talk of the town in the horror literature stuff, I started reading his stuff and I really liked a lot of it. You know, Clive Barker, The Damnation Game. This is the first book of his that I read. Pretty good book. Then of course you've got the 3-volume Books of Blood here, 1, 2, and 3, with these really hokey covers, you know, pretty interesting covers there. Then you've got these 3, which are still Books of Blood, but they're not named Books of Blood. You got The Inhuman Condition, In the Flesh, and then Cabal. And if you've ever seen the movie Nightbreed, that's what the main story in this one. It's about 200 pages of this book. That story is what Nightbreed is based on. And then probably my favorite book of all of Clive Barker's is The Great and Secret Show. I really like this book for whatever reason. It's just very interesting to me, and I've read it like 2 or 3 times. And Imagica. I read this one when it came out in paperback. I couldn't afford the hardback at the time, and I was just really happy when it finally came out in paperback and I got to read it. I had a physical copy of Weaveworld somewhere, but I went looking for it and I couldn't find the thing for some reason. So I don't know what happened to it. Let's see here. And now, Brian Lumley. He passed away, sadly, a couple years ago because I really like some of his Necroscope stuff. I read this one a couple times, and I've read this one a couple times, and you might be able to see up there at the top shelf there, I've got a whole bunch of more Necroscope stuff that I can read when I'm ready to get to it. And then we've got some Greg Keyes, The Black God, The Waterborn and the Black God. I don't know how that's going to look on the, yeah, this is 1, this is 2. When I first started reading these, I bounced off of them a little bit, but I kept at it, and in the end, it was completely worth it because everything came together in a really interesting way. Now, if you are a fan of role-playing games, you may remember one called Dark Matter. It was a setting that was in I forget what it was called, like the D20 system or something like that, way back in the day. And here's my cat to mess up my video. Oh, there she goes. So I've kept these for whatever reason. They're not like super great novels, but I kind of liked them. I remember being very interested in the story and the background of them. So there's that one, Of Aged Angels. And then In Hollow Houses and If Whispers Call, you know, those four. There was supposed to be like 2 or 3 others, but I think they canceled the whole Dark Matter universe series, stopped printing the books, and kind of did away with them, didn't bother printing anymore. And then we get back to a little more Greg Keyes. This is his 4-book Age of Unreason series that I've kept for many years. Some interesting stuff here. I really enjoyed these when I was reading them. Don't remember much about them, so I should probably read them again. And then maybe someday I'll do an actual review of them, even though they're a bit old to be reviewing these days. And then we get to one of my all-time favorite characters of all, Drizzt Do'Urden and Homeland, Exile, Sojourn, The Crystal Shard, and Streams of Silver, and The Halfling's Gem. And I've read way more than that. I'm way deep in the series. I've got most of them. And I really enjoy Salvatore's writing, although some of his other books, sometimes I think he has a tendency to use demons too much, but you know, that's just me. Anyway, and then last but not least, I have got these, which everybody seems to have a copy of, but I don't see too many people lift these up in their videos. These old, what are they? I think they're Ballantine books, fantasy editions of The Lord of the Rings. So there's The Fellowship and The Two Towers and The Return of the King. I've read those a couple times. That's probably enough. I don't know that I'll ever read them again because there's just so much more out there, and I've got such a giant TBR pile sitting there on those shelves behind me. Anyway, that's some of the books I've kept over the years, despite them being physical books and being a pain in the butt to pack up and move every time I've got to go somewhere. But I think I'm in my final home here in Sweden where I'm at. And hopefully someday I'll be able to plow through all these shelves once I retire. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and maybe I've reminded you of some books, because all these are pretty much older. Maybe I've reminded you of something you read when you were younger, and maybe you'll go looking for it and find a copy and relive some good memories with those books. Bye for now. Hi, I'm not real big on keeping physical books. God, books.